The briefing did not mention them by name. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Harlan had been given a full intelligence package before the operation: target location, threat assessment, rules of engagement, secondary extraction route. Everything a Delta Force squadron commander needed to run a night operation in Baghdad in the spring of 2003. What the package did not contain was a meaningful description of the Allied unit that would be operating on his left flank. It identified them as a Polish Special Operations element. It listed their complement as 12 operators. It noted they had been in theater for 3 weeks. That was it. 3 sentences for 12 men. Harlan, who had been running special operations for 19 years and had worked alongside British SAS, Australian SAS, and Israeli Seret Makul, read those 3 sentences and moved on to the target package. He had never heard of GROM. He had never heard of anyone who had. He assumed this was about to be a babysitting operation. He was wrong in a way he would spend the rest of his career trying to find the right words for. But to understand how we got here, you need to go back to a country that almost nobody in the West was watching. GROM stands for Jednostka Wojskowa Komandoso, the Polish Special Forces unit formally established in 1990. The name itself is the Polish word for thunder. It was not chosen for poetry. It was chosen because the men who built the unit understood that their entire operational philosophy depended on arriving before the enemy could prepare for them. The unit was created under circumstances that most Western special operations communities would find unusual. Poland in 1990 was a country in the middle of a democratic transition. Its military still adjusting to the end of the Cold War, its intelligence structures being rebuilt from the ground up. The men who founded GROM drew their doctrine not from Warsaw, but from the organizations they had studied most carefully: the British SAS, the American Delta Force, and Israeli counterterrorism units that had spent the previous 20 years defining what modern special operations actually look like. Selection for GROM has a failure rate that has never been officially published. Estimates from Polish military observers place it consistently above 80%. The course is physically demanding in the way that all serious selection courses are. What distinguishes it, according to the accounts of those who have observed it, is the psychological dimension. GROM is not looking for operators who perform under pressure. They are looking for operators who simply are themselves under pressure. The distinction is significant. Performance can degrade. Character does not. By the time GROM deployed to Iraq in 2003, the unit had been operational for 13 years. They had worked in Haiti. They had been in the Balkans. They had accumulated an operational record that existed entirely outside the knowledge base of the American officers who were about to meet them. Before we go further, if stories told at this level of detail are what you are here for, subscribe to Deep Insight right now and never miss one. Every unit, every operation, every piece of history we cover gets this level of attention. Now, back to Baghdad and the unit nobody had briefed the Americans on. The assumption was not arrogance. It was something more reasonable and more dangerous than arrogance. It was an evidence-based conclusion. Delta Force in 2003 was arguably the most experienced counterterrorism and direct action unit on Earth. It had been operating continuously since 1977, through Panama, through the Gulf War, through Somalia, through Afghanistan. Its operators had been selected from the best the United States Army could produce, and then refined further through a training pipeline that most of the military could not even access. When Delta Force commanders thought about Allied Special Operations units, they thought about units they had already worked with: the SAS, the SEALs, the Australians, and they ranked them accordingly. Poland did not appear on that ranking, not because anyone had considered Poland and found it lacking, because no one had considered Poland at all. Harlan's assumptions about the GROM element on his left flank were specific and reasonable. He assumed they would be competent at the basic level. He assumed they would follow American lead in the operational planning. He assumed he might need to adjust his timeline to account for communication difficulties. He assumed, in the very back of his mind, that he might need to protect them if the operation went badly. The GROM operators, who had been watching the American planning process with polite and entirely concealed amusement, said nothing to correct any of this. They had a different way of making introductions. The operation went in at 2:15 local time on a night in April 2003. The target was a compound in a district of Baghdad that had been flagged as a logistics node for irregular militia units resupplying the defense of the city. Intelligence had identified 3 high-value individuals believed to be present. The compound had 8 to 12 armed guards, a vehicle at the south gate, and at least 2 possible secondary exits that the satellite imagery had not fully resolved. The plan allocated the Delta element to the primary breach on the north side. The GROM element would cover the south gate, prevent any vehicle extraction, and hold the perimeter while the Delta team cleared the interior. It was, in other words, the support role, the role you give the unit you are not sure about. At 2:17, 2 minutes after insertion, the vehicle at the south gate attempted to extract. This was anticipated. What was not anticipated was the speed of the GROM response. The vehicle was stopped, the occupants detained, and the south perimeter locked before the Delta team had completed the first internal room clearance. In time, the GROM element had secured their entire assigned sector in 4 minutes and 11 seconds. At 2:24, before the Delta team had extracted the primary targets from the compound, the GROM element had already identified a third exit point that the satellite imagery had missed, had posted a 2-man position on it without being asked, and had done all of this without a single radio transmission to the American command element. Harlan was listening to his radio in the command vehicle. He heard nothing from the GROM frequency. He assumed this meant they were struggling. He asked his liaison for a status update on the Polish element. The liaison checked. Then he said one sentence. The liaison said, "They're already done, sir." Harlan did not respond immediately. He had been in special operations long enough to know what done meant in the context of a night operation on a partially resolved compound in an active combat environment. Done did not mean finished. Done meant contained, secured, documented, and waiting for the next instruction. Done achieved 4 minutes into a 15-minute planned clearance by an element he had allocated to a support role was not something his planning had included. Over the following 90 minutes, as the Delta team completed the interior clearance and extracted the 3 high-value targets, Harlan received a series of situation reports that consistently described the GROM element as being several steps ahead of where the operation plan had placed them. They had identified and secured a weapons cache in an outbuilding that was not on the target pack. They had detained 2 additional individuals attempting to leave through a drainage channel at the compound's western edge. They had done both of these things quietly, efficiently, and without requesting any support from the American element. What struck the Delta operators who debriefed the following morning was not the quality of the GROM performance in isolation. It was how the GROM operators moved. There was no visible discussion on the objective, no hand signals beyond the minimum. Operators appeared to know where they needed to be before they were told, and they arrived there at precisely the moment they were needed and not a second before. The timing was not the product of rehearsal. It was a product of years of training with the same team, in the same doctrine, toward the same standard. One Delta operator, reviewing the night vision footage in the debrief, stopped the tape at a particular moment and watched it 3 times. Then he said, "How did they know that was coming?" The operation that produced the account most cited in the years since took place 6 weeks later. The target was a senior network facilitator in a residential area north of Baghdad. The intelligence window was narrow, 12 hours from confirmation to operation. The compound was in a densely populated district, which meant the rules of engagement were tighter, the collateral damage risk was higher, and the margin for operational error was correspondingly smaller. It was a kind of environment where American commanders preferred to use their most experienced operators and accept no deviations from the plan. Harlan assigned GROM the primary breach. This was not a decision he had made lightly, and it was not a decision that came without internal resistance from his own command staff. 6 weeks of joint operations had produced a different picture of GROM than the 3-sentence entry in the original intelligence package. But placing a foreign unit on the primary breach of a high-value target in a complex environment was still not a routine call. GROM went in at 23:50. The target was in the second room off the main corridor. The intelligence had been accurate on this detail. What the intelligence had not anticipated was that the room had been modified since the last imagery. A secondary wall had been added, creating a compartment that the original floor plan did not show. This discovery happened at the breach point in real time, with the clock running. The GROM team adapted in 11 seconds. No withdrawal, no request for guidance, no communication to the command element until the room was clear and the target was detained. The modification was dealt with using a technique that the Delta debriefers later noted they had not seen used in that particular configuration before. The whole operation, from breach to extraction, took 19 minutes. The planned time was 25. Harlan, listening in the command vehicle, heard the extraction call and checked his watch. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "What is their selection process?" There is an account, shared across several platforms and confirmed by multiple people who were present, of what Harlan said in the full mission debrief following operation in the residential district. It is not a long account. The relevant part is perhaps 40 seconds of speech in a 40-minute debrief. He said that in 19 years of special operations, he had worked alongside a significant number of Allied units. He named several of them. He described what made each one useful and what their limitations were in the specific and unsentimental language of a man who has been assessing professional capability for 2 decades. Then he described GROM. He said that the Polish unit had, in the 6 weeks of joint operations, demonstrated a level of small unit tactical competence that he had not encountered before in an Allied formation. He was specific about this. Not as good as he had expected. Better than he had expected. He had not known what to expect, and what he had found was something he did not have an existing category for. He said, "They are not trying to be Delta. They are not trying to be SAS. They are something that I do not have a good word for yet, and that is uncomfortable for someone in my position, because my position requires me to have words for things." He paused. The room was quiet. Then he said, "Find out what their selection process is, because whatever they are doing, we need to understand it." Nobody in the room laughed. Nobody made a note. Several of them simply looked at each other. GROM completed 32 joint operations with American Special Operations Forces during Operation Iraqi Freedom. The official record of those operations is classified. What is known comes from accounts of the operators who were there, from the journalists who embedded with Special Operations units in 2003 and 2004, and from a small number of official statements that the Polish government has released in the years since. What those accounts consistently describe is a unit that operated in a way that was recognizable to the American operators alongside them and simultaneously unlike anything they had encountered from an Allied force. The technical proficiency was there. The physical standard was there. What was less expected was the adaptability. The ability to receive an intelligence update in the middle of an operation and incorporate it without breaking the operational tempo. One SEAL Team 6 operator asked in a 2007 interview what he remembered about working alongside GROM in Iraq, said something that has been quoted in every serious account of the unit since. He said, "You never had to check on them. They were always exactly where they needed to be, and they never talked about it afterwards." That last sentence is the one that stayed with people. Poland is not a country that most people associate with elite military capability. That is precisely the point. GROM was built in deliberate obscurity by men who understood that reputation is a liability in their line of work. The unit that leaves no patches on its operators, that transmits nothing on the radio when silence is possible, that finishes the operation 6 minutes ahead of schedule, and says nothing about it in the debrief. That unit does not need a reputation. It has something better. It has a record. Harlan retired from Delta Force in 2009. He has given one interview in the years since to a security studies journal in 2014. He was asked, at the end of the interview, which Allied unit had most changed his understanding of what special operations could achieve. He said the name without hesitation. He did not elaborate. Subscribe to Deep Insight right now. Every story goes this deep. Like this video if GROM changed how you think about what elite actually means. And leave a comment. Before today, had you ever heard of them?